At Christmas dinner, my mom said, "We didn't get you anything. You've been distant." My sister laughed, "But thanks for covering the mortgage this year." Then my dad handed me a plastic plate and said, "There's extra ham in the garage fridge." I looked at the pile of gifts I'd wrapped for everyone and left without a word. That night, I opened my banking app, froze every family card, and revoked access to the shared car. At 10 p.m., my dad called me twice. At 10:30, my mom texted, "Why can't we fill gas?" What arrived at 11 p.m. changed everything. I, 32M, stood in the doorway of my childhood home on Christmas Eve, holding four carefully wrapped gifts and a bottle of wine I'd spent too long picking out. The house smelled like glazed ham and cinnamon, exactly like it always did. I could hear laughter coming from the living room, the kind that made you feel warm before you even stepped inside. I didn't know yet that in less than an hour, I'd be walking out of that door for what might be the last time. My sister opened the door before I could knock, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen or maybe the wine. She hugged me with one arm, her phone in the other hand, and told me everyone was already eating. I should have noticed then that the table was already set, that they'd started without me even though I'd confirmed I'd be there at 6. It was 6:15. I walked into the dining room and saw my parents at the table with my sister's husband and their 2 kids. There was an empty chair at the end, the one that wobbled, the one we usually reserved for coats. My mom looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and told me I'd made it. My dad nodded without looking away from his plate. My sister sat back down and continued a story she'd apparently been telling before I arrived. Nobody got up. Nobody said Merry Christmas. Nobody asked about the drive or how work had been or anything at all. I set the gifts on the side table near the china cabinet, the one my grandmother had left us. The presents looked bright and deliberate next to the clutter of mail and old magazines stacked there. I'd wrap them myself, spending an embarrassing amount of time making sure the corners were crisp and the bows were centered. My mom had always cared about presentation. I sat down in the wobbly chair and served myself from the dishes in front of me. The ham was good, just like always. My sister finished her story, something about a vacation they were planning to Colorado, and everyone laughed. I hadn't heard the setup, so I just smiled and ate. That's when my mom looked at me, her fork poised over her plate, and said they hadn't gotten me anything this year. She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. She said I'd been distant lately, that I hadn't been around much, and it didn't feel right to get me gifts when I wasn't really part of the family rhythm anymore. I stopped chewing. I looked at her, then at my dad, who was suddenly very interested in his green beans. My sister was smirking, that same smirk she'd had since we were kids, the one that meant she knew something I didn't or that she'd gotten away with something. Then my sister laughed, actually laughed, and said, "But hey, thanks for covering the mortgage this year." She said it like it was a punchline, like it was the funniest thing she'd said all night. Her husband chuckled, and my mom's expression didn't change at all. I felt something cold settle in my chest, something that made my hands feel numb. I'd been paying their mortgage for 11 months. 11 months. My dad had called me in January, his voice tight with stress, and told me they were going to lose the house. He said the hospital bills from my mom's surgery had wiped them out, that they were drowning, that they didn't know what to do. He asked if I could help just for a little while, just until they got back on their feet. I'd said yes immediately. I'd set up an automatic transfer from my account to theirs, $2,000 a month, every month, without fail. I'd skipped vacations. I'd driven my car an extra year past when I should have replaced it. I'd eaten more rice and beans than I cared to admit. But they were my parents, and you help your parents. My dad stood up then, walked to the kitchen, and came back with a plastic plate, the kind you get in a pack of 50 at the grocery store. He handed it to me and said there was extra ham in the garage fridge if I wanted more. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like he was being generous. The plate was flimsy and white and had nothing on it. I looked at that plastic plate. I looked at the pile of gifts I'd brought, still sitting on the side table, untouched and unacknowledged. I looked at my family, at their full plates and their full glasses and their full bellies, and I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a wallet. I stood up without saying a word. My sister asked where I was going, her tone annoyed, like I was being dramatic. I didn't answer. I walked to the side table, picked up all 4 presents, and walked straight out the front door. I heard my mom call after me, asking what was wrong, but I didn't stop. I sat in my car in their driveway for a long moment, the gifts in the passenger seat, and I felt something crack open inside me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger yet. It was clarity. I drove home in silence. No radio, no nothing. When I got to my apartment, I sat on the couch and opened my banking app. The automatic transfer to my parents was scheduled to go through in 3 days, right after Christmas. I canceled it. Then I looked at the shared credit card I'd added them to 2 years ago, back when my dad said they needed it for emergencies. I froze it. Then I checked the car insurance policy that covered the car I'd bought for my mom after her old one died. I called the insurance company's emergency line and had myself removed as the primary policyholder, transferring it to my dad's name, but revoking the automatic payment from my account. Every bridge they'd built with my money, I burned it. At 10 p.m., my phone rang. My dad. I didn't answer. He called again 5 minutes later. I didn't answer. At 10:30, my mom texted asking why they couldn't fill gas. The card had been declined. She said it must be a mistake, that I should call the bank. I didn't respond. At 11 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman I didn't recognize, maybe in her 50s, holding a large envelope. I opened the door cautiously and she asked if I was me, using my full name. I said yes. She handed me the envelope and told me I'd been served. Then she walked away. I stood there in my doorway, holding this envelope, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain yet. I opened it right there, under the porch light. It was a lawsuit. My sister was suing me for $50,000. I had to read it twice before it made sense. She claimed I'd borrowed money from her over the years and never paid it back. She had dates, amounts, detailed descriptions of transactions. The document said I'd taken $20,000 from her in 2018 for a down payment on my apartment. It said I'd borrowed $15,000 in 2020 for medical expenses. It said I'd borrowed another $15,000 just 6 months ago for car repairs. Every single word was a lie. I'd never borrowed a cent from my sister. Not ever. In fact, the truth was the exact opposite. She'd borrowed money from me at least a dozen times over the years, small amounts mostly, a few hundred here and there, but she'd never paid any of it back. I'd never pushed it because she was my sister. But this was something different. This was calculated. This was planned. I sat down on my couch and read through the entire document, every page, every word. The filing date was December 20th, 5 days ago. She'd filed this lawsuit 5 days before Christmas, before she sat at that table and laughed about me paying the mortgage, before my parents handed me a plastic plate. They knew. All of them knew. That's when it hit me. The distance my mom mentioned, the lack of gifts, the casual cruelty, it was all a setup. They were building a narrative. I was the distant son, the ungrateful one, the one who wasn't really part of the family anymore. And when this lawsuit went public, when people asked why my own sister would sue me, they'd have their story ready. They'd say I'd changed, that I'd pulled away, that I'd refused to pay back money I owed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started digging through everything. Bank statements, emails, text messages, anything I could find. By morning, I had a folder of evidence that would bury her claim. Every transaction I'd ever made to my family, every request for money they'd sent, every thank you text that proved I was the one lending, not borrowing. But more than that, I found something else. In my email, buried in a folder I rarely checked, there was a message from my dad's email address from 8 months ago. It had been sent at 2 in the morning, and I'd apparently opened it, but never responded. The subject line said urgent family matter. The message itself was short. It said my mom's medical bills were actually covered by insurance, that they hadn't been drowning after all, that things were tight but manageable. It said they appreciated my help, but I didn't need to keep sending money if it was a burden. I had no memory of reading this email. But there it was, marked as read, dated April. I checked my bank statements from April. The $2,000 transfer had gone through like clockwork, and every month after. They'd tried to tell me to stop, and I hadn't listened. Or I had listened and forgotten. Either way, I'd kept paying, and they'd kept taking. But that email also meant something else. It meant my dad knew I was sending money I didn't need to send, and he'd let me keep sending it anyway. The sun came up, and I was still sitting there, surrounded by printed bank statements and my laptop screen glowing in the dim light. My phone buzzed. My mom again, asking me to call, saying they needed to talk about the card situation. I didn't respond. Instead, I called a lawyer. I found one who did consultations on weekends, a guy who specialized in family law and fraud. I met him at his office at noon on Christmas Day, and I brought everything. Every document, every email, every text message. He looked through it all, his expression getting grimmer with each page. Finally, he looked up at me and told me I had a strong case for a countersuit. He said my sister's lawsuit was clearly frivolous, that I had documentation proving every claim was false, and that I could potentially sue for defamation and emotional distress on top of legal fees. But then he asked me if I was sure I wanted to do this. He said family lawsuits got ugly fast, that even when you won, you lost. He asked me if there was any chance of reconciliation, any possibility of sitting down and working this out. I thought about my mom's face when she told me they hadn't gotten me anything. I thought about my sister's laugh. I thought about that plastic plate. I told him to file the countersuit. The next 3 days were a blur. The lawyer moved fast. By December 28th, my sister had been served with my response and countersuit. By December 30th, my phone was exploding with messages from everyone. My sister called me a liar and a monster. My mom said I was tearing the family apart. My dad didn't say much, just asked why I was doing this. I didn't respond to any of them. What I did instead was post a detailed timeline on social media. I didn't name anyone, but I laid out the facts. I explained that I'd been financially supporting family members for nearly a year. I explained that I'd been served with a fraudulent lawsuit on Christmas Eve, right after being humiliated at dinner. I posted screenshots of bank transfers with names redacted but dates visible. I posted the email from my dad telling me to stop sending money, dated months before the lawsuit was filed. I ended the post with a simple statement. I said that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you'd do anything for, and that the hardest lesson to learn is when to stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. The post went viral in my extended family and friend circles. By New Year's Eve, I had over 100 messages from relatives I barely knew, some supporting me, some calling me cruel, most just asking what had really happened. My aunt, my mom's sister, called me directly. She was the only one I answered. She told me she'd suspected something was off for months, that my mom had been bragging about their renovations and new furniture while simultaneously crying poor to other relatives. She said my sister had been posting pictures of expensive dinners and designer bags on social media, while claiming she was barely scraping by. She asked me why I hadn't said anything sooner. I told her I hadn't realized there was anything to say. I thought I was helping family in need. I thought that's what you did. She was quiet for a moment, then told me she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She said it was about time someone called them out. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. She said my sister had done this before. 5 years ago, my sister had accused her ex-boyfriend of stealing from her. She'd threatened to sue him, dragged his name through the mud, made him out to be a monster. My aunt said the family had believed her at first, until the ex produced bank records showing my sister had actually been stealing from him. The case had fallen apart quietly, and the family had swept it under the rug. My parents had paid the ex-boyfriend $20,000 to go away and not press charges against my sister. $20,000. The same amount my sister claimed I'd borrowed from her in 2018. I asked my aunt why no one had told me this. She said they'd all agreed it was better to let it stay buried, that my sister had been going through a hard time, that everyone makes mistakes. I hung up feeling sick. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since Christmas. The lawsuit and countersuit are moving forward. My lawyer is confident we'll win, but he says it'll take months to resolve fully. My family has split into factions. My aunt and a few cousins have publicly supported me. My parents and sister have circled the wagons and are telling anyone who'll listen that I'm a vindictive liar who abandoned them in their time of need. Most of the extended family is staying neutral, which I suppose is its own kind of answer. The mortgage situation came to a head last week. My dad called me from a number I didn't recognize, so I actually answered. He told me they were going to lose the house if I didn't resume payments. He said I was being selfish, that I was punishing my mom for my sister's actions, that the whole family would be homeless because of me. I asked him about the email from April, the one where he told me to stop sending money. He went quiet, then said he didn't remember any email. I told him I had it printed and time-stamped. He hung up. 2 days later, I got a call from their mortgage company. Apparently, my parents had listed me as a reference when they'd refinanced last year, so the company was reaching out to inform me that the account was in default. But here's the thing. The payment amount they mentioned was $1,200 a month, not $2,000. I'd been sending $2,000. for 11 months. That's an extra $8,800 that went somewhere other than the mortgage. I asked my lawyer what I could do with this information. He smiled, the kind of smile that meant bad news for someone else, and told me it strengthened the countersuit significantly. If I could prove my family had been misrepresenting their financial situation to extract money from me, it opened the door to fraud charges. I authorized him to subpoena their bank records. My sister's lawyer reached out yesterday, trying to negotiate a settlement. They offered to drop her lawsuit entirely if I dropped mine and signed an NDA. I would have to agree never to speak about any of this publicly and never to pursue any financial claims against any family member. I declined. My mom sent me a long email last night. It was the first time she tried to communicate directly since that text about the gas card. She said she loved me, that she was sorry things had gotten so out of hand, that she never meant to make me feel unappreciated. She said the dinner had been a misunderstanding, that they'd been planning to give me my gifts later in private, that my sister's comment about the mortgage had been a joke in poor taste. She said none of them had known about the lawsuit until after I'd been served. She said my sister had acted alone, that they'd been just as shocked as I was. I wanted to believe her. Some part of me, the part that still remembered being a kid and feeling safe in that house, wanted to believe her so badly. But I looked at the timestamps. My sister filed the lawsuit on December 20th. My family had 5 days to mention it to me before Christmas Eve. 5 days to warn me, to apologize, to explain. Instead, they'd sat me down at a table, mocked me, and handed me a plastic plate. I didn't respond to the email. Update 2. 3 weeks now. My lawyer got the subpoenaed bank records. It's worse than I thought. The extra $800 a month I'd been sending above the mortgage payment had been going into a vacation fund. My parents had been planning a trip to Europe. Business class flights, 4-star hotels, the works. They'd been saving for it since March, right after my dad sent that email telling me I could stop sending money. But that's not even the worst part. My sister had been receiving monthly payments from my parents. $500 every month since June. The memo line on the transfers said loan repayment. My parents had been taking my money and giving it to my sister. The same sister who was suing me for $50,000 she claimed I owed her. When my lawyer showed me the records, I just sat there. I couldn't process it. He asked me if I wanted to add my parents as defendants in the countersuit. He said we had grounds for fraud, unjust enrichment, maybe even conspiracy. I told him I needed time to think. That night, my sister showed up at my apartment. I don't know how she got past the building's security, but there she was, banging on my door at 9 p.m., yelling that I needed to talk to her. I didn't open the door. I called the police instead. They arrived within 10 minutes and escorted her out. She screamed the entire way down the hall that I was destroying the family, that I was ruining everyone's lives, that I'd regret this. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to file a restraining order. I said yes. The restraining order was granted 2 days later. My sister is not allowed within 500 feet of me or my home. My parents sent a joint text calling me paranoid and cruel. They said my sister had just wanted to apologize, that I'd blown everything out of proportion. I blocked their numbers. My aunt called again yesterday. She said my parents had started a GoFundMe to save the house. The description said their ungrateful son had abandoned them in their time of need, leaving them facing foreclosure and financial ruin. It said they'd always supported their children unconditionally and couldn't understand why they were being punished now. The GoFundMe had raised $300, mostly from people who didn't know the full story. My aunt asked if she should comment on it with the truth. I told her to do whatever she thought was right. An hour later, she'd posted a detailed comment explaining that I'd been sending them $2,000 a month for almost a year, that they'd been using the extra money for vacations while crying poverty, and that my sister was actively suing me based on fabricated claims. The GoFundMe was taken down within 3 hours. My mom called my aunt and told her she was no longer welcome at family gatherings. My aunt said that was fine. She didn't want to attend anyway. I've started therapy. My therapist asked me what I wanted the outcome of all this to be, what would make me feel like justice had been served. I told her I didn't know. She asked if I wanted my family back. I said I didn't think I'd ever really had them to begin with. Update 3. It's been 6 weeks. The court date for the lawsuits is set for March. My lawyer says we're in an excellent position. My sister's lawyer has tried 3 more times to negotiate a settlement. Each offer gets more desperate. The most recent one offered to not only drop the lawsuit, but also to have my sister publicly apologize and pay my legal fees. In exchange, I'd have to agree to drop the countersuit and sign the NDA. I said no. My lawyer asked me why. I told him that an NDA meant silence, and silence was what had let this happen in the first place. If I signed it, my sister would do this to someone else eventually. Maybe not next year, maybe not in 5 years, but eventually. And that person wouldn't have the documentation I had, wouldn't have the resources to fight back. He nodded and told the other lawyer we'd see them in court. My parents lost the house. The foreclosure went through last week. They're moving into a rental, something smaller, in a worse part of town. My mom sent me one final email with photos of them packing up the house I grew up in. She said I should be proud of myself, that I'd gotten what I wanted, that they hoped I could live with what I'd done. I looked at those photos for a long time. My old bedroom, boxes stacked where my bed used to be. The kitchen table where we'd had 1,000 dinners. The living room where we'd opened presents every Christmas morning of my childhood. I felt sad, but I didn't feel guilty. I didn't cause this. I tried to help, and they'd betrayed that help in the worst possible way. The house wasn't lost because of me. It was lost because they'd chosen vacations over mortgage payments, chosen giving money to my sister over financial stability, chosen greed over family. I didn't respond to the email. Yesterday I got a message from my sister's ex, the one my aunt had told me about. He'd heard about the lawsuit through mutual connections and wanted to reach out. He said he was sorry I was going through this, that he knew how painful it was to be betrayed by people you loved. He said if I needed someone to testify about my sister's pattern of behavior, he'd be willing to do it. I passed his information to my lawyer. Tonight I'm sitting in my apartment, the one I almost lost because I'd been paying my family's bills instead of fully funding my own savings. I'm looking at the 4 Christmas presents I never gave them, still wrapped, sitting in my closet. I thought about donating them, but I couldn't quite bring myself to do it yet. My therapist asked me last week if I thought I'd ever reconcile with my family. I told her I didn't think so. She asked how that made me feel. I said it made me feel free. The truth is, I don't know what happens after March. Maybe we'll win the countersuit and my sister will have to pay damages. Maybe my parents will finally understand what they've done. Maybe none of it will matter and they'll just keep playing the victim forever. But I know one thing. I'm done setting myself on fire to keep them warm. I'm done being the family wallet, the easy target, the one who's supposed to just take it because that's what family does. I'm done. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm okay with that.